Come now, touch the withered arm and travel to the realm of Shadow. I will not be far behind. May we meet again.
Curse you, Bale!
Mongrel intruder. That tarnished, it seemeth.
If you have known sin, if you grieve for this world, then yield the path forward to us, to I, Miquella, and my promised consort, Radahn.
So, I've played through this DLC 5 times at this point, and after letting the hype die down, after collecting my true honest thoughts, I think now is a good time to sit down and fully discuss Shadow of the Erdtree in depth. FromSoft is known for saving their best content for a game's DLC, and Shadow of the Erdtree continues that streak by improving the good Elden Ring had, by creating a new world for us to explore unlike any other. This has been one of my favorite gaming experiences. Elden Ring and its DLC is a masterpiece, easily one of the best games of our generation. While Shadow of the Erdtree harbors some of the game's best experiences, including the areas, the bosses, and the lore, I have found cracks in the armor that have erased this perfect facade I had when I first played the DLC. By no means am I calling the game bad, but after enough playthroughs when you become so familiar with it, you start to notice the flaws. Shadow of the Erdtree already had some controversial topics, such as the boss design, which I'll discuss later on. Regardless, I like to do these long, in-depth videos once a game is out for a few weeks, once everyone's hype has died down. That way, we can discuss every piece of what makes these games, the good and the bad. So, without further ado, let's begin, shall we? My name is Josh, also known as Gorguinni, and I hope you enjoy. Elden Ring has already cemented itself as one of the best open-world games. I've played a lot of open-world games, and I can say from my experience, Elden Ring is definitely in the top 3 without question. When Shadow of the Erdtree was announced, Miyazaki stated that the Realm of Shadow would be about the size of Limgrave, with similar content and a more condensed landscape. What a complete lie, because this DLC is massive. Probably about, I would say, half what the original game was. This is essentially Elden Ring 1.5. Now, what Elden Ring excelled at when it comes to the open world was level design, reward value, and reward variety. In the Realm of Shadow, these positives are still there. You can find numerous caves, field bosses, and of course, legacy dungeons, with a plethora of new valuable items to either enhance or change your character. This pairs well with Elden Ring's replayability factor because this weapon, for example, may not suit your character now, but when you play through again, you might use it then. The equipment has its own category, so I won't divulge too deep into the details of what you'll find. Rather, it's the landscape that I want to focus on. Shadow of the Erdtree has phenomenal world design, and that's due to its verticality. The Abyssal Woods seems like a fog that most games would indicate as unreachable from a higher vantage point. On my first playthrough, I saw the fog, and I was wondering if I could explore that later on. Sure enough, through the Darklight Catacombs, the Abyssal Woods was right after it. Of course, it was locked behind one of the most infuriating bosses in the entire game, but I digress. In contrast to the Abyssal Woods is Jagged Peak, the highest point in the game. Here you will find the corpses of lesser dragons, lightning will rain from above, the hue of dark orange will saturate the entire area, and at the very end, one of the best bosses in the game. What I find to be impressive is how connected these two areas are, as well as the other environments. You can easily travel from one place to the next on Torrent without any loading screens to derail the immersion. Even in the first area, the Graveside Plain, you can see all the different levels of this area to explore, and yes, each one is reachable. There is something fascinating about how many games I've played that render in these deep valleys, these fogs that you obviously can't reach, or giant mountains in the back that are only there for decoration. And then I played Shadow of the Erdtree where, hey, this giant mountain is actually a part of the map. It's not just about the verticality, but the accessibility of that verticality, and in that, Shadow of the Erdtree does a wonderful job. The overall map is great, but what about the individual environments? How do they hold on their own? Well, something that I think is crucial if you want to have multiple areas is having a variety of them that contrast well. This includes color, tone, enemies, and most importantly, level design. I'm going to show you my top 3 favorite overworld areas, and I want you to notice the uniqueness of each one. The Ancient Ruins of Rao. And if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, I don't really care. It's interesting that of all the different places in the realm of Shadow, the Ancient Ruins is the only one with a clear, bright sky. I like this a lot because it takes something that we perceive as normal and puts it in a game where it becomes abnormal. Throughout the lands of Shadow, it's dark and depressing, and then all of a sudden I feel like I'm in a children's TV show. These ruins have been long abandoned, with nature trying to reclaim what was once theirs. You can explore outside the ruins if you wish, but the way you progress is through the ruins itself. The contrast between the cheery outside and the depressing inside is very well done. Now, it is quite a basic interior, I will admit, although the maze-like structures do encourage exploration, so that's fine. The ruins are layered in a more steep, vertical fashion when compared to other areas. From the outside, you see each layer stacked upon one another. The only way to reach the bottom layers is through the ruins inside. You'll find hidden openings within the walls that lead to secret parts of the area, or large stone doors that indicate the path forward when you're ready. The ancient ruins have great contrast compared to other areas, and an incredible level design that is vertically the most impressive. At number 2 is the starting area, the Gravesite Plain. FromSoft knows how to start a DLC, and by that I mean 4 of them involve interacting with a hand of some sort. Once you exit this cave, you're greeted by an awe-inspiring scene. The phantom tombstones decorate the ground, the open landscape invites exploration until drawing your eyes towards the giant Skadu tree. It is an amazing moment that encapsulates the DLC as a whole. Now, as the starting area, there are plenty of items to find to begin your journey, including all the new weapon classes, important NPCs to talk to, and of course, an immediate field boss that you probably shouldn't tackle right now. You can see all the different areas to explore, and again, all the different levels of land are accessible. I was always super excited to see where and how I would reach certain areas. Shadow of the Erdtree is great at hooking the player into exploration. It tempts you with unreachable places from a starting vantage point, almost challenging you to figure out how to get there, and this area, I think, does it best. Gravesite Plain also includes multiple dungeons for us to explore. Now, we know that Elden Ring's base game kind of had poor dungeon quality because it's similar structure, similar design, it wasn't that great. In Shadow of the Erdtree, we now have these new giant Everjails that cater towards warrior jars and their lore. There's also legendary forges now that harbor an unholy amount of smithing stones. It's so easy in Gravesite Plain to get lost, to pause and admire the scenery. This game is absolutely gorgeous, with the starting region being one of the best. The Abyssal Woods are vastly different when compared to every other area in the game. Instead of being a large landscape for us to explore, it's this shrouded forest that caters towards a horror game more than an action RPG. This is Elden Ring's take on atmospheric horror, and it works. Ironically, what really stood out to me was the music. It is by far one of the creepiest soundtracks I've heard. It kinda reminds me of Majora's Mask in a way. If this was used in an actual horror game, it would be terrifying. Before you venture far into the woods, Torrent will forcefully retreat, refusing any attempts to recall him. This sets up the tension very well, as this does not happen anywhere else in the game. Torrent is always willing to jump off into the death zone with me until I get the consecrated snowfield skip right, but here he doesn't take any chances, and neither should you. You run into messages telling you to turn back, leave now, but if you venture deeper, the tone changes. Don't let it see you. It cannot be stopped. Eventually, you run into why the warning signs exist. The aging untouchables. Invincible enemies that inflict frenzy with their sight alone. If you're spotted, one grab is an instant death. Stealth is your only option. The tall grass is your friend. Even after sneaking past these grotesque monsters, what awaits at the end of these woods is even more terrifying. I adore the different approach that this area had. I think it's great. The foggy atmosphere combined with the eerie music makes for an amazing experience. Without question, my favorite area in the game. However, it's not only these open world segments that have impressed me about Elden Ring. Legacy dungeons are the pinnacle of level design in this game. These areas parallel well with what we had in previous games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne. Now, I still much prefer the level design in those games. Fishing Hamlet is one of my favorite areas / levels in video games, period. But Elden Ring does a decent job of capturing that former glory. Out of all the legacy dungeons, I could talk about a lot of them, but I really want to focus on one that I think is the best in Shadow of the Erdtree, Shadowkeep. See, one of my biggest issues with the new legacy dungeons is how short they are. I know this is an open world game, it's just unfortunate how little time they take up on an average playthrough. Not only are they rather small, especially when compared to previous games, but it is so easy to run straight through them without any issues at all. It's not like you couldn't speedrun through areas in the previous games. However, in order to do so, there is a lot of interaction involved anyway. You would still go through a good portion of the area. Multiple times in Shadow of the Erdtree, I reached the boss's room with surprising speed. Keep in mind, I was doing my best to explore every nook and cranny that I could possibly discover. Fortunately, with Shadowkeep, this wasn't an issue. I can still blitz through to reach Messmer, but the sheer size of this legacy dungeon is far beyond anything we've seen in this game. On my first playthrough, it just kept getting bigger and bigger. I didn't know when it was going to stop. With minor exploration, you'll be able to climb the tower with ease to reach Messmer. If you decide to explore a bit more, you'll find a bridge that leads to the ancient ruins on the left side, an entirely new area. If you approach from the right side, you'll find the church district, flooded and abandoned. You can drain the water to access the deeper regions of this area, and if you go further down, there's even a remembrance boss, the Erdtree avatar. However, in the middle, we have the Specimen Storehouse, my absolute favorite area in the game. I love the clever idea of using these hanging bodies as bridges, and the atmosphere reminds me of the Grand Archives from Dark Souls 3. I love that. The hanging corpses reflect a dire outcome from an ancient war, or perhaps malicious curiosity, as these are specimens, so experimentation may not be far behind. There are so many paths to take, so many hidden items to discover that have, again, great reward value. The dungeon has a distinct theme, but it still varies in layout. It's not all the same. The entire castle is grim, yet regal. I also enjoyed the influence of Messmer's rule reflected in the enemy design. You'll find a variety of Fire Knights that have affinity towards Messmer's fire. They roam the grounds, each one harboring unique skills. There's even a couple that act as mini-bosses. Shadowkeep is not just interconnected within its own area, but acts as a key component in the story and in reaching other areas. The only issue with how good Messmer's castle is by how it diminishes every other legacy dungeon. Don't get me wrong, there are some fantastic legacy dungeons in the DLC. I love Midra's Manse, but it does not compare to the depth of Shadowkeep. Now, this game's not perfect. I have a couple of issues with the open world, one problem in particular that stands out, and it's something that a lot of open world games do struggle with: empty space. As a matter of fact, the DLC has more empty space than the base game. Now look, there are a lot of things to discover in this game, but I couldn't help but notice on repeat playthroughs how empty certain areas were. Certain parts of the map are for specific questlines rather than being a part of the actual map. I mean, look at the Finger Ruins. They're cool areas, but there's zero to no substance there besides being a part of Ymir's questline. From the foot of Jagged Peak to Bale the Dread, there's essentially one path to take, and that path has, again, little to no substance. Sure, you might find the occasional dragon, but there's no weapons, no talismans, nothing of any value here. I found myself hopping from one spirit spring to the next without any curiosity dragging me away. There was nothing to be curious about. The Abyssal Woods on our first playthrough is amazing, but once you get used to the horror factor, you realize how slow it is not having torrent. The Abyssal Woods is like that black sheep level for repeat runs that most games have. In God of War Ragnarok, it's Jotunheim. In Resident Evil Village, it's the Beneviento household, and so on. Once you understand the tactics here, it becomes a tedious hide-and-seek game that you have to play every single time. And like Jagged Peak, there are very few items worth grabbing here. Both of these areas are amazing design-wise. On my first adventure, I loved every second of it. Now whenever I replay the DLC, the only thing to really find here is the boss at the end of it. I mean, to be fair, replayability can be a double-edged sword. Once you explore everything, you know what dungeons, what caves, even what entire areas to skip over. However, those are far and few in between. Regardless, Shadow of the Erdtree has a phenomenal world with minor blemishes that does not ruin the overall painting. It encapsulates a vibrant, colorful, and creative universe where exploration is first. After a few playthroughs, I still love adventuring through each region. I still love sitting back and simply taking in the atmosphere. This game's design is great, which may be a bit difficult to prove for this next chapter.
My purpose standeth unchanged. Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death in the embrace of Messmer's flame.
I made a video talking about why Shadow of the Erdtree has incredible boss design. That was made after one playthrough, After 5, it's a bit harder to stand by that claim. But this is why I did multiple runs, waited a few weeks, and made this video now, because opinions change after that. By no means am I saying the bosses are bad, I still love every single major boss except for you, so let's talk about the good that this game does first. The bosses in the DLC are great in dealing with spectacle and visual design. Each boss has a unique atmosphere that reflects their story, their powers, while still being effective for gameplay purposes. One that stands out to me is Midra, Mother of Fingers. After completing Ymir's questline, you are teleported here, underneath an ocean-like space, with water being your foreground, fingers protruding from below, and giant chasms filling the sky above. FromSoft certainly likes to have the ocean as an arena, and I'm not complaining. This is my favorite boss arena in the entire game. It has this celestial appeal to it, almost as if we are in our own fabric of reality beyond the realm of Shadow. This contrasts very well with Bale the Dread. At the summit of Jagged Peak, Bale's fight is saturated in a blood orange with lightning decorating the background. Design-wise, he has these demon-like features, or in relation to Elden Ring's lore, omen-like features. It actually begs the question, we've really never seen dragons infected with the curse of an omen, so perhaps there's more to this, but I mean, I don't know. His horns twist and curl around his head, forming a very different structure from most dragons in the game. Design-wise, he's great, but it's his spectacle that is by far his best quality. Messmer is one of tyranny. His arena is shrouded in darkness, reflecting the overall design of Shadowkeep. His demeanor signifies loyalty to his cause, yet his execution is cruel justice through impalement. Then when pushed into a corner, the Abyssal Serpent erupts, transforming the fight into a chaotic struggle between us and a lost child of Marika whose curse was his last hope. What you'll notice is that each boss has a distinct design and tone that is never replicated again. What abilities they have and how they use them always has a story to tell, and this is why I love FromSoft's boss design. It's beyond simply being cool, which is fine, but it explains the reasoning behind why they have these abilities in the first place. Commander Gaius, for example, uses gravity magic, but why is that? Well, he used to be a senior disciple of an old Alabaster lord who taught him how to use gravity magic. He was a good friend of Radahn, their rivalry perfecting their use of their powers. There are a lot of great bosses, but after every single playthrough, I think Midra, Lord of the Frenzied Flame, has slowly become my favorite in the DLC. Much like the Abyssal Woods, Midra's visual theme takes on a more horror-like approach. His cutscene is hard to watch as he slowly tears off his own head, only to reveal the reason why he was sealed away. The Frenzied Flame. I love how terrifying this encounter is, not just because of the reveal, but because we know about the Frenzied Flame and how it affects people. I think my favorite part about Midra is his build-up. On my first playthrough, I was constantly asking myself why the Hornsent were here in Midra's manse. They don't make sense being here thematically speaking. Then as you discover more and more pieces to the lore, you realize they were sent here to execute Midra and his followers. Headless corpses line up outside the manse as a warning to those who partake in the art of frenzy. His consort Nanaya asks him to do only one thing: endure. Thus, Midra sealed himself away to endure the pain, the isolation, his failure, until we came to put an end to this weak, false lord of frenzy. Visually and thematically, Shadow of the Erdtree does a great job, but let's be honest here, what really matters is the gameplay. Now that I've had time to reflect on these boss fights, I do think now they are a bit too aggressive for their own good, but not in the way that you're thinking. For me, it's not the difficulty, alright? Keep in mind, I'm a nerdy pyramid head who makes gaming content because I like doing it. I don't mind outrageously challenging boss fights. I can easily adapt to a boss's moveset and counter effectively because I learn very quickly after so much of what I endured in games like Bloodborne and Sekiro. See, my problem is when I find a really cool weapon with an amazing weapon art that I can't use at all against any of the bosses. Let me explain. There are numerous Ashes of War, weapon arts, incantations, and sorceries that are amazing. They look cool and deal good damage. However, they are too slow against most, if not all, bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree. I understand against a portion of the boss fights, that's fine. I'll even give you half the roster. If I can't use a specific weapon art against half the bosses, that's fair. However, that's not the case at all. Every single boss is faster than my character can mechanically keep up with. This is the crux of the issue. This means that my counterattacks are limited because the game limits my movement. I know I'm not the only one here when I say that Elden Ring needs the Bloodborne sidestep. It is a much better option for evasive purposes, and Bloodborne is still very difficult. Arguably more difficult than all of Dark Souls because it has a more aggressive playstyle. It suits Elden Ring unequivocally better than the dramatic role we have now. This would give us the much needed opportunity to strike back effectively without relinquishing the challenge too much. Our openings are so tight now that trying to unleash any Ash of War over 2 seconds is equal to shooting ourselves in the foot. It's not impossible, and you still have the freedom to be a bit stylish if you know the boss well enough. So then my question is, why give us all these cool skills and spells if they are inefficient against every boss in this game? Just food for thought. The other thing, and this is minute in comparison, but it's the lack of cutscenes for me. Most of these bosses don't have an introduction, which makes them feel not as important, not as intimidating, not as memorable. Of course, the main ones do, like Messmer and the Lothric Princess 2.0, but what about the rest? Only 2 other bosses, Midra and the Dancing Lion, have cutscenes. Like, in comparison to the base game, only 3 out of the 15 Remembrance bosses do not have any cutscenes. In Shadow of the Erdtree, it's 7 out of 11. I mean, our expectations were high for most bosses to have a cutscene when most bosses in the base game had them. It doesn't make sense to me why they don't have a lot of cutscenes, as cutscenes never hurt a boss's design, rather they improve it. I don't know for sure why. Again, it's not a big issue, but something I wanted to bring attention to. Now, let's talk about the difficulty and what I think about it. I can recognize that this is a major issue for some people, like I see your suffering. Many people say that the bosses are too aggressive, they deal too much damage, or have long combos where essentially we become the spectator in our own fight. What do I think? I think we shouldn't let a couple of bosses dictate the overall quality that this DLC has. In other words, don't let a few bad apples cut down the whole tree. There are a lot of fair and fun bosses that are amazing to challenge. It's just not right to look at the bad ones and categorize the entire roster as bad. Personally, I think some of them, like the Divine Beast and Putrescent Knight, are actually quite easy, but they're still a lot of fun to fight. A part of the charm for me is seeing how far I can improve with every single journey. Now, I can definitely agree that certain bosses can be kinda rough. R'hllana has long combos that track the player aggressively, Radahn barely has any downtime between his attacks, and Commander Gaius does not allow any attacks to connect or time to even heal sometimes. These bosses can be evasive, where you're chasing more than fighting them. Multiple bosses have attacks that are meant to roll catch you. Radahn can do this with a swift double swipe that you can barely react to. As a matter of fact, let's talk about Radahn and Miquella specifically as a representation of the DLC's difficulty, because they harbor pretty much every aspect of what makes these games difficult. For my personal experience, Radahn and Miquella are by far the most difficult boss I have ever faced in my gaming career. Radahn is aggressive without leaving much room to counter his onslaught. There are certain combos that I look for because those are the ones that are easy to take advantage of, such as his sword slam, gravity slam, etc. Again, he can roll catch you with his double swipe, with one easily connecting with the second if you're hit. His meteors I couldn't figure out for the longest time, but all you have to do is run away and dodge to either side. After that, it's not too bad. Besides that, his first phase, honestly, is not bad at all. I think it's well structured, honestly. It's when Miquella joins the fight that this boss goes from balanced to being difficult just because. Radahn is generally the same, except Miquella's light acts as an AoE that extends his range and deals additional damage. If you get hit by the sword, it stuns you into getting hit by the light very frequently. With Radahn, dodging towards him is the only way to surely dodge the entire combo effectively. As a matter of fact, with a lot of these bosses, dodging inward or aggressively is where it works best. And again, the Bloodborne sidestep would work so well with this. I don't understand why a more aggressive dodge is not in a more aggressive playstyle in game. It just makes no sense to me. Once I understood that, it wasn't a big deal from then on. That's fine with me. However, the overwhelming amount of special effects, I know, can be disorienting. It's really never been an issue for me, so I'm not going to harp on that too much. What I will harp on is Miquella's Rapunzel-like hair. His hair completely obscures Radahn's attacks from all angles except from the front. Basically, my gameplay boils down to watching only Radahn's arms very carefully so I know what's coming next. But even then, I'm not always 100% sure what he's doing. What really makes this boss the pinnacle of difficulty in Shadow of the Erdtree is the classic, nearly impossible to dodge move that other challenging bosses have, like Malenia. This attack follows after his Draco Meteor, and what occurs is 4 to 5 false slams, followed shortly by the real one, which is then followed by an AoE. It is devastating. This attack, for the longest time, I could not figure out how to dodge, and to this day, I can't 100% effectively dodge it. There's also another variant where I think it's 3 to 4 slams that's immediately followed by a usual combo that he'll do. You'd think the final slam would be the end of it, but Radahn continues to attack. Add in the light AoEs, the disorienting special effects, I can see why many people think this boss is a bit too much. Now, what do I think? I think Elden Ring is 2 for 2 when it comes to the final boss having a better first phase than the second. Miquella is mediocre design. It doesn't bother me too much, but it's not great. See, the false slams do next to no damage, so I just dodge the real one and the AoE after without a problem. This game gives you so many tools to negate most of Miquella's damage, and other bosses for that matter too. Use a Mimic tier for all I care. I don't care. I know some people are purists, and it's if you don't beat the game naked with a broken sword, then you're not playing the game right. Listen, dude, play the game how you want. I don't care. And if you're like me, I refuse to use summons. But there are so many other things you can use in this game that can negate a lot of damage. Use a broken build. There are plenty of them that make this final boss take 30 seconds, or a shield that can block most of the damage for you. All in all, I think this final boss is alright. He's not my favorite. If I were to do a ranking, he would be, I think, number 7. Besides the final boss, Commander Gaius is the only one that I have problems with. On the back of a boar, Gaius is similar to the Elden Beast, where his mobility is too much. I know you can use Torrent for this fight, but his tracking and aggression almost make it worse to fight on horseback. Inconsistent hitboxes as well. Sometimes I get hit by the charge twice. I take no shame in cheesing this boss, and that should tell you all you need to know. All the other bosses, no issues at all. Of course, every game is going to have those few that are annoying or poorly balanced. It's just kind of a part of the process. But the comparison between what's good and what's bad leans towards the positive side of things. However, if there's one aspect about this game that I can't forgive, it's the weapons. The glazing stops now. I'm dropping the more professional attitude for this chapter because out of all the different aspects of Elden Ring's DLC, this is the only one where I have a negative perspective on. I want to make this clear, by the way, this is based on PvE, alright? I don't do invasions or fight players online, so I don't know what that side of the spectrum looks like. Besides the bosses, the vast variety of builds Elden Ring has is my favorite part about this game. There's a reason why I've done so many challenge runs before in the past, because each run has been completely different and super fun. I still haven't even come close to exploring every type of build. Unfortunately, in the DLC, the array of new equipment is just not good, man. It's this messy platter between being mediocre at best or completely overpowered. I think the balance between what's usable and what's not is lopsided. Imagine a seesaw with every new weapon I pick up. One was great, the other was bad, and that's pretty much how it played out for the entire game. I'm not saying that every weapon needs to be broken, but it just needs some type of value that makes it fun to use, or at least optimal. Of course, some weapons are going to be better than others, but don't leave the gap too wide is what I'm saying. For example, perfume bottles. I love the idea behind them, how they deal pure elemental damage, but so many other weapons do their job better. The freezing bottles inflict frostbite and pure magic damage. Great, but any weapon with a chilling mist Ash of War does it better. The fire spark bottles do pure fire damage, and it's actually decent, but so many weapons can be infused with flame art and deal more fire damage plus physical damage. If you're gonna make a purely elemental weapon, perhaps make it do more elemental damage. We also have frenzied and poison variants, which are the most useless afflictions in the game. Why not create a holy bottle, scarlet rot, or use bleed? For all I care, stuff a bottle with gravel and have it do pure physical damage. There are 5 perfume bottles in the game, and 2 of them are already useless by default. I know that the lightning bottle had a broken Ash of War rolling sparks, which apparently was patched, as it wasn't supposed to do that much damage. Now, from what I've seen, it's mediocre at best. Speaking of new weapons in general, Shadow of the Erdtree introduced 8 new weapon types for the DLC. My question, is why are you gonna add 8 new weapon classes for there to only be a handful in each one? The perfume bottles have the highest selection with it being 5, but most have 3 or 2. The throwing weapons only have 1. The worst part, they're not even that good. These throwing knives belong to a niche category called Smith Script weapons. These weapons replace the heavy attack with a ranged throw that deals damage from afar. Throwing knives are especially unique because any attack throws the weapons. Really cool, really unique concept. I was super excited to throw a giant hammer at all my foes, only for them to be less than satisfactory. They are outclassed by most other weapons in their respective types. The range drop-off on their throwing attacks is awful. You can't apply any buffs to the weapon, and even with the applicable normal buffs, the damage is subpar. It's such a fun mechanic that was totally wasted. The other thing I don't understand is why 11 intelligence and faith are required to wield the freaking weapons. This makes 0 sense. It doesn't scale and drops the value of these weapons significantly. I like to maximize my stats for specific weapons sometimes, so this to me is a waste of leveling. Now, some of the new weapons are amazing. I don't want you to think that I'm crapping all over the new weapons here. We got some quality, such as the thrusting shields. I did a challenge run on the channel where I didn't dodge at all using these weapons. The fact that it was actually easy to beat the game without dodging using these weapons really says something. There's also the light greatswords, backhand blades, and great katanas. All of them are excellent in their own ways. I've noticed that this time around, the normal smithing stone weapons are the best in this DLC. I always had an affinity for unique weapons with unique weapon arts, but in Shadow of the Erdtree, it's all about these standard weapons. I've played around with the Black Steel Great Hammer, and it was very powerful. Holy Infusion mixed with Cragblade and empowered guard counters, this thing is a monster. We also got some new weapons in older classes, like Colossal weapons. The Blood Fiend's Arm is one of the best weapons. It was actually nerfed. But the Fire Knight's Greatsword is the perfect faith weapon with ridiculous fire scaling. This is great. However, I think the biggest offense here are the new sorceries and incantations. I'm not a strict sorcerer myself, but I feel bad for anyone who is because you guys got the worst end of the stick here. Again, for how big this DLC is, you would expect a large variety. The sorceries in the DLC are roughly half the amount of new incantations, and there are even less that are actually viable. And some of these have weird requirements, like both putrescent spells that require faith for some reason. It's a sorcery, just have it only use intelligence. I've heard high praise for a couple of these, like Gravitational Missile, Impenetrable Thorns, Glintstone Nails, and a couple others. Besides that handful, don't even bother with the rest though. As for the incantations, there are quite a few optimal choices. My journey started off rough though because I wanted to use Bale's incantations that you acquire in Dragon Communion. When something costs a staggering 53 arcane to cast, it's fair to assume it would be powerful. I did a whole run using only Dragon Communion spells, and what I discovered is that Bale's Flame Lightning is just not that good at all. The comparison we have to it is Dragon Maw. It's faster, has ridiculous hyper armor so you don't get interrupted. I would get interrupted all the time with Bale's Flame Lightning. And with all applicable buffs, it does a little less damage than Bale's incantation. Like, it's such a disappointment. I was so excited to test out this spell only for it to be outclassed by one of the first communion rewards you can get. Knight's Lightning Spear and Fire Serpent are good from what I've used, but I'm not too familiar with the rest of these incantations. All I know is, collectively, they are better than sorceries based on usefulness. Much like the new weapon classes though, there are new incantation types that, again, only have a couple in each category. Like, why are you gonna create a whole new class called Saint of the Bud when Servants of Rot exist? Just put them together, it's not that hard. Messmer's Flame I understand. Spirals, whatever, I don't really care at this point. A lot of these spells trade in efficiency for spectacle. These spells look great, but in execution, especially against the aggressive nature of these bosses, it's impossible to use. What makes me really annoyed about this is that this is the DLC, the content after establishing what works and what doesn't for a video game. I would expect the best equipment in the game to be here. I have played a lot of games, and in their DLCs, the best items and armor sets are there. It's also the scaling, like, a lot of these weapons are good when you look at them at a first glance, but then when you realize that the scaling is not as good as base game weapons, there are so many better weapons in the base game that I would just use them personally. When compared to the base game, Elden Ring's DLC is disappointing in the equipment category. Again, there is some great equipment, but the potential was so high only for it to be a stale finish. Thankfully for this last category, this is not the case. The lore is one of the most fascinating parts about these games. It's interesting, it connects everything together, and helps explain the why behind questions that need answering. In Shadow of the Erdtree, they basically extended that net further, adding more to the land, adding new pieces of lore that we never knew about, while still connecting it to important aspects in the base game story. When you're adding to a story, you have to go about it a certain way. Either you improve an already existing character or piece of the story to give it its own substance, or you can answer the unanswered questions, solving the mystery, or you can take a whole new trajectory from there. There's a lot to discuss when it comes to the lore, but I primarily want to focus on the main character here, Miquella. I'm not going to get into the details of his full story, rather I want to discuss what I think of Miquella's overall story and how it does ruin some established characters. Miquella first needed a way to enter the realm of Shadow, and his plan was to have his half-brother Mog become completely infatuated with him, to rip him out of his cocoon from the Erdtree and essentially scar Miquella's being. We didn't know at the time, but this is exactly what Miquella wanted. We thought that Mog was a full-on pedo, yet through this revelation, Mog beat the claims, he cleared his name, and he's actually the victim here. Yet somehow, it gets even worse for Mog. Radahn during the final boss fight isn't here in both body and soul. If you take a closer look at his vimbraces, omen horns protrude from underneath. Radahn's soul is occupying Mog's body. That's why he can use a little bit of the blood flame incantations. Not only did Miquella enchant Mog to the point of having us kill him, but he then defiled his corpse for his promised consort's return. Dung Eater would be proud. I think it's a great twist that has some complications because where's the line between Mog's actions that were his versus underneath Miquella's charm? We know he had communion with the Formless Mother, he tried to create a new order through this dynasty. We don't know exactly what's his doing and what's Miquella's, although personally, I think he had communion with the Formless Mother beforehand. So much of his character though is crossed off as under Miquella's control. It's like one of those movie endings where it was all a dream. It's kinda cheap, it's kinda lame. If we had a more established version of Mog, who he is and what he wants to accomplish, then Miquella charmed him, it would be way better because then there would be a contrast between the two. Here's my interpretation. I think Mog was under Miquella's control when he established this whole dynasty. Through this dynasty, he created an army of loyal followers, including Ansbach, including the White Masks, surgeons that under the cover of mercy satiated their bloodlust. His followers are cruel, covered in blood, and serve a wretched mother, whose power is from piercing her body. It's quite disgusting. Miquella's end goal is to create an era of compassion, but I don't think he ever counts in the full consequences of achieving said goal. We know for sure Mog's involvement with the Formless Mother was his choice, but this entire dynasty would not exist if it wasn't for Miquella's charm. These followers are not following Mog, they're indirectly following Miquella. I think it's not just about Mog's character, but all of what he's created. Miquella is the cause of all of this. Of course, that's just a theory, but it sounds cool. The other character I want to talk about is Radahn. Here's where things become sticky because we really don't know much about the backstory here. We don't know if he was under Miquella's spell or not. To me, Radahn doesn't seem like someone who willingly abides by any order other than the Golden Order. He was proud to serve the Golden Order. He admired Godfrey and his father Radahn, so much so that he wore his red hair proudly. Even after the Shattering, Radahn was still loyal. Miquella's charm may not be as effective on demigods, so he came up with another plan. This is where Malenia comes into play. This could possibly answer the reason as to why these two fought in the first place, because Miquella may have tasked his sister to go and take down Radahn, so that he will be transported into the realm of Shadow. Before her flower blooms, Malenia whispers into Radahn's ear, "Miquella awaits thee." Now this could mean a couple of things. At the very end of the DLC, we watch a cutscene of a younger Miquella asking his brother Radahn to hold his side of the vow, to be his consort. We still don't know if Radahn was willing here, or perhaps it was pushed to the side until he was reminded through Malenia. I mean, if Radahn was under Miquella's charm, why would he need to be reminded? This could also explain the Radahn Festival, a celebration of war meant to put down General Radahn in a glorious battle. That definitely can be true, or a facade by Miquella so Radahn could be killed and transported into the realm of Shadow. That's kinda reaching though. But when we fight him, I believe he's fully under the control of Miquella. When his soul transported into Mog's body, Miquella could have easily used any of his charms to make him a puppet, essentially. Again, this is all theoretical, none of this is fully known, but it's fun to speculate. I really do like Miquella's character though, and what he represents. His era of compassion is truly a good thing. Like, he wants to create a world where no race is excluded, but this pertains to an important, infamous question: do the means justify the ends? Miquella uses his power to force others to do his bidding. While his cause is truly good, how he goes about it is questionable at best. He reminds me of a character from Berserk, Griffin. He's another character with a rather enchanting aura about him. He doesn't have any powers, but there's something about him that draws people towards him. Like Miquella, he wanted to create a kingdom for himself, a country under his rule. The way he achieves his dream is through some nasty collaborations, to put it lightly. Again, I like Miquella's character, but in a way, it directs the lore of Elden Ring towards him and puts everyone else on the side. Radahn had his own thing going for him, only for Miquella to use him in the end. He was an established character, like, truly one of the good characters in the lore of Elden Ring. We know that he learned gravity magic so that he could ride his horse Leonard forever. Again, he was loyal to the Golden Order, he had a lot of things going for him, only in the end, oh, he was controlled by Miquella. Like, I don't know how I feel about that conclusion to his story. But my main issue with Shadow the Erdtree's lore is I wish we got more background on the Outer Gods. Every single one is still a huge mystery, and I don't know about you, but I was really hoping the DLC would shed some light on their origin, their powers, cults, or even include a boss fight. All in all, there are still too many unanswered questions here, and not in the greatest way where we leave it to interpretation. Like, I don't like that. It's more so getting half the question and trying to get the answer anyway. This makes me wonder if Elden Ring 2 is plausible because there are that many pieces to me of the puzzle still missing. I know Miyazaki likes to leave things purposely to our perspective, but Elden Ring has too many open wounds that need attention. Still, beyond Miquella's story, there are great pieces of lore from Messmer to Midra to Bale, and I definitely recommend diving deeper into those sections of Elden Ring's story. I'll be honest with you, I do my best to have a strong ending for these video essays, but I just suck at it, man. My conclusion paragraphs were always terrible in school, so I'll leave you with this. Is Shadow of the Erdtree perfect? No. I don't think any game will ever be perfect. Are there things that I would change? Absolutely. However, I don't think that's the point here. I make these videos because I'm so passionate about games and the art that they provide. I believe that video games are art, and Shadow of the Erdtree is one of the best pieces of art I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. Definitely this game as a whole is in my top 5 for sure, although I don't know exactly where it lands. I love Red Dead 2 and both Last of Us games, so I really have to sit down and, think about it for a long time to choose my favorite, which might come sooner or later. I plan on doing a top 10 favorite video games list for 100k, so hey, if you did enjoy it, consider subscribing. As for my score, Shadow of the Erdtree gets an easy 9.5. Even with all the small blemishes I have with this game, I mean, especially the weapons, in comparison to other games I've played, it is still leagues ahead. I think it's crazy that Miyazaki himself stated that Elden Ring is getting closer to his ideal game. He looks at this masterpiece and says, I can do better. That's crazy to me. Anyways, my voice is leaving me and it's time for me to go. So, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and to subscribe for more content like this. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care everyone, and of course, stay safe.